Hello, I'm Sally Ann Airy, and welcome to Fearless Forward, the podcast that asks leaders how they've faced their fears. Today we're crossing the Atlantic again to Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm in conversation with an exceptionally talented and multi-skilled founder, leader and coach, who's also a thinking partner on my Evolving Leadership program and a transatlantic ambassador for Mindful Command. Christina Kisley is on a mission to catalyze growth on purpose. Inspired by the vision of conscious capitalism to elevate humanity through business, she works with organizations big and small, from companies of one and not-for-profits to some of America's biggest corporations. Growing up in Ohio, the eldest of three daughters, Chris's university degree was in business with an HR major, and very soon she realized that her passion was in personal and professional growth. She left corporate life 23 years ago to start her first company, 3 years before her daughter was born prematurely at just 26 weeks. In this conversation, Chris shares some lessons from her own life experience which have directly influenced her work with leaders. Chris, welcome. And I have a burning question. What led you to the work you do today?
So that's a really good question. And I think there are a couple things. So one of the first things is that when I graduated from high school, I actually knew that I wanted to go, I knew I wanted to be in business. I knew I wanted to help people. And at that time, what that meant was you could get a bachelor's degree in business and a major in human resources. And so I did that. And then I actually worked full time and went to school full time. So I started working in my field. I actually started working in my field when I was 17. I started working at a restaurant. I ran a restaurant. I was a division trainer. So I started actually in training and development, like the growth aspect of kind of human resources. And then I got a job in personnel. And when I was 19, and I quickly realized that I did not want to be in the human resource management side, so the legal side of HR, but I found a very fast love in training and development, which is the growth side. So everything about like teaching, supporting, encouraging, coaching, all the helping people grow pieces. So that was the first thing that brought me to the work. And then as I started moving into the work, I started having experiences. Like one of the experiences I remember is one of my leaders actually said something to me to the effect of, she was giving me feedback and said something to me to the effect of that I was acting like a victim. And I remember being so pissed off. I was so mad. And it did not set well at all. It's kind of like having food poisoning. It was like having emotion poisoning.
It's an interesting piece of feedback, isn't it?
You think? So every time something like that happens, my answer to it is to dig and learn. So I start digging and I start being like, well, what's that about? What's that look like? So I learned about like the Karpman Drama Triangle. I learned about, like how does somebody become a victim? So what that started to bring up for me is a bunch of stuff from childhood. Dad was a persecutor. Mom was absolutely a victim. And so I started realizing like it was true.
For anyone listening who hasn't heard of this, do you want to just take us through what the triangle is?
Yeah, so it basically says that where we would like to be is adult to adult in relationship, which means I own me, you own you. I have choices, you have choices. I don't own any of your choices, you don't own any of mine. So basically, it's a very equal positioning. Karpman Drama Triangle basically says that based on our history, our family upbringing, we often don't act in adult to adult ways. We act as, in any given situation, we can act as the victim. So poor me, people are doing things to me. The rescuer, I have a cape on and I'm going to save the day. Whether you want me to save your day or not, I'm going to save your day. Or the persecutor, which is kind of like judge and jury.
Okay, so when you mentioned your parents there as persecutor and victim, does that mean you were the rescuer then, or what was going on?
I was actually probably a victim as well, but I was actually a victim. So there's a difference between being psychologically a victim, like being like, I don't have any power, am at the mercy of other people. So as an adult, we're not at the mercy of other people unless you're in extreme circumstances. So that's not what I'm talking about, but just in general. But as kids, we actually are victims. So we don't have a lot of power. It's not like you can get out of a situation that is kind of a traumatic situation. So my dad was like psychologically and emotionally abusive, and my mom was extremely passive. And so what I ended up being was the rescuer of my sisters. So eventually they were a lot younger than I was, and I protected them from my dad.
Well, I suppose the realization was in hindsight, wasn't it? At the time that you were being the rescue of your sisters, you probably didn't feel like a victim, or did you?
Probably not. I mean, that's probably one of the things that actually helped me not feel as much like a victim when I was in my teens, like 15, 16, 17, because I stood in the gap between my dad and my sisters. So I didn't let him near them.
So, a courageous rescuer, and possibly, not that I'm remotely an expert in this field, but possibly slightly masking the victim within.
I mean, for sure, because it was out of fear, right? Like my rescuing of my sisters at that point was out of fear. So, as children, we actually don't play in the Cartman Drama Triangle really because it's really it's an adult concept. But when she said that to me, I recognized after I did some research and was trying to understand like what that meant, what I recognized was that I had been significantly impacted by the family that I grew up in. Not that I didn't know that, but like all of a sudden I like really knew that. And I was everything from like filled with like shame, disgust, anger. There was so much that came up in me from that experience that I just started digging into the work of how are we impacted by our like family of origin and all the circumstances and environment and everything. How are we impacted? And then how can we heal and grow so that we don't do the same thing to our own kids?
And you have your own kid, right? Audriana.
I do. I have two. I have one that's not mine biologically, but I've known him since he was 18 months old, so he calls me his bonus mom. And then I have Adriana, who will be 20 in June.
Just picking up on what you just said about not wanting it to impact how you parented Audriana and your, as the bonus mum as well, for a young boy, very young boy. How did you approach that?
Well, so it's interesting. So training and development, because it's growth oriented in nature, it was an easy slide into leadership development, which I was doing a little bit of, but I moved my trajectory more towards leadership development because the interesting thing about leadership, when you're a leader, you basically are building a metaphorical family. And so what ends up happening is through the relationships that you are building with your team, you're all growing. So if you're a leader who invests in your team and invests in the individuals in your team and invests in like their relationships, like helping them build relationships and grow, it simulates a type of family system. And interestingly enough, people's issues pop inside this metaphorical family system. And so what I was doing is I was focused on helping these people in these teams, these leaders in their teams. I was helping them grow in a way that would actually transcend professional to personal, because we're a whole person. And I knew that if I could help them heal and grow together in the work setting, they actually would be healing and it would translate into their personal lives. So whether it was a romantic partner with their children, I just was like, if we can actually heal and grow, we're going to be better in all of our relationships, but specifically with our kids because we're so impacted when we're children. It's where we learn all of our patterns. And so if I can help build healthy parents, they can build healthy kids.
And you're doing that through your leadership coaching, development work.
Yeah. Well, leadership training, team development, and coaching. Yeah.
But that's your approach. So look, if I may summarize, look at the whole person, understand what's going on, how they're showing up, what may or may not be healed, supporting their capacity to work through that, show up for their teams, take care of their teams in a way that isn't harmful to them or others. And to what extent did you feel that you needed to do that work, so to speak, on yourself first?
Yeah, I mean, because I was in the field, I did it at the same time. And so what would happen is I just would learn and grow myself, which would help me help other people learn and grow. So I would learn something and then I would share it. I would learn something, I would integrate it into what I was building or what I was teaching. And so every time I learn something new, I'm able to help other people with whatever it is they're dealing with.
And is that learning as a parent?
No, I mean, yes. And I would go to like week-long intensives. So I went to something called the Ultimate, where it was a leadership intensive where you learn in the morning and you learn in the evening. And then during the day, there's like 3 group therapy sessions where you're actually working through your own stuff, as well as totally learning as a parent and also learning through my own, like my romantic relationships. So yes, it's all been really interwoven for sure.
And what I'm hearing from what you said right back at the beginning and everything you've said since is that as you experience something, a trigger, a reaction, whatever it may be, your first step, your first thought perhaps, after the feeling is, what's going on? What haven't I yet understood? Let's get into this and figure out what's going on. And then sharing that, or at least I suppose being more aware of it, so that when you see something similar coming up in the people you're working with, you can explore it from a place of, I guess, deeper understanding and awareness of that, right?
I mean, the amount of compassion that I have cultivated based on like my really traumatic upbringing, the trauma with Adriana, having her early, like there have been a bunch of different traumatic events in my life where then I've actually dug in and done the work, the healing work, the knowledge work, and then have cultivated a significant amount of compassion so that when I'm empathy and compassion. So when I'm working with people, I often am coming from a place of, no, I really do get it.
And you mentioned Adriana was born early. How early was that?
She was born 13 and a half weeks early. So I had her I went into labor when I was 25 weeks and I had her 2 days later, which is right when I turned 26 weeks. So I had her very early.
Okay. And she clearly survived. I imagine it was an incredibly difficult time for you all.
When I found out I was pregnant, I honestly was like, God must have made a mistake because I clearly should not be a mother. Like, this is clearly something that should not be happening because I'm going to be a terrible mother.
Informed by what?
My upbringing. I was like, I don't know how to do this well. This is going to be really bad.
So you felt that despite who you knew you were and what you stood for and what you valued and what you brought to the world, there was something within you that was telling you, because of your upbringing, because of how difficult it was and what you'd experienced, you couldn't be a good parent.
Yeah.
So how did you respond to that?
I mean, after I was completely terrified, I don't know. Sometimes I actually think like her birth was even though it was like super traumatic. I mean, I was on a business trip, for God's sake, in Wisconsin when I went into labor. They had to take me by, they went back and forth. Are we taking her by life flight? Are we taking her by ambulance? They took me by ambulance to the hospital. I mean, it just was such a train wreck. But I actually went into shock. So I sometimes think that was such a gift because I could no longer wallow in the fear of I'm going to be a terrible parent. Because I was like, well, I mean, you're going to be a parent, so you probably should get your shit together. But also, how about we just hope she lives? Because she almost didn't. I mean, she had a brain bleed. She had a hole in her heart. She had a problem with her eyes. Her lungs weren't fully developed. Her lung collapsed 2 weeks in, they had to put her on this thing called a high frequency vent, which, I mean, we almost lost her. And so I remember standing in this window. She was on this high frequency vent. They basically were like, you know, if she makes it through the next couple of days, she'll make it. But she may not. And I remember thinking, like, I will be the best parent I can possibly be. Not that I wouldn't have felt that before, but I just remember thinking, like, okay, well, you don't have a choice. Like, you got pregnant and you have a baby. And if she lives, like, you will be the best parent you can possibly be. You will do all the things, you will do all the work.
What I'm hearing there is there's something about the power of gratitude there that kind of put everything else into perspective for you or something. That's what I'm hearing.
I think actually it's a gift and a responsibility. So it's kind of like similar but different. But when you say yes to being a leader of people, you said yes. Like, you are responsible now to actually be the best human you can be for these other humans that are looking up to you. Like, you actually can hurt them or you can help them. And I think the same thing about being a parent. So I'm like, I have this little human. It is my responsibility now to show up in the best way possible to make her the healthiest and happiest that she can possibly be, so that she's like a responsible part of society, but that she has the best possible chance of having good, healthy relationships. Like, for me, I'm like, she's a gift and I am responsible. So responsibility is a huge driver for me around humans.
Yeah, it sounds like for you, it's like a big wake up call. Saying to yourself, I am responsible, kind of everything falls into place at that point.
Well, you don't get to be a victim. You don't get to like tap out.
Somebody else is depending on you. So almost as if the things that you knew needed attention still, even though you'd already done quite a bit of work on it, nevertheless needed more attention, kind of put on hold for a bit because you were responsible for another little human being who needed the best of you. So it wasn't as if it went away, but it was kind of on hold.
I mean, sort of, except that like I went back to work 4 months later. So I was trying to run a company while I had a preemie, which she was in the hospital for 3 months. Like, so I was with her 12 hours a day in the hospital for 3 months. And then I went back to work a month later. And so I'm in the field, right? So you can't really get away from growth work when you're in the field of like leadership development.
So you were responsible for your baby, responsible for your work, responsible for the company you'd created and the people working within it. A lot of responsibility. So tell me a bit more about what then happened for you over the years, not necessarily immediately, but over the years. What did you notice about how some of the things that had previously troubled you, that you put on hold, so to speak, what happened?
So I just had to invest. Like, I had to invest time in everything from therapy to intensive training to learning new skills to continuing like my education. It's just been this process of continued growth and doing the deeper work of like therapeutic work. Right before I had Adriana, I left corporate America to start a business. So I left corporate in 2002 and I had her in June of 2005. Anyway, I ended up doing master's work in human resource development and counseling psych during that like 3-year run before I had Adriana. So I was already digging into the counseling psych world.
And I'm wondering, in the midst of all of that, everything you've told us so far, can you recognize in hindsight what you may have or may not have been afraid of?
Oh my God. I was afraid of I was afraid of being a parent for sure. Then I was afraid of Adriana dying when she didn't die. Then I was back afraid of being a parent. Then I was afraid of running a business and like trying to be successful running the business. Then I was afraid of like how all the trauma from childhood had negatively impacted me. And like, how am I going to be healthy how am I going to be healthy in my romantic relationship? How am I going to be healthy for my kid? Like, I don't know, so many things.
The deeper stuff, so to speak, from your childhood, was that obvious to you at the time?
I mean, not completely, but what I'll say is something would come up and I'd start working on the thing that came up. And then once I felt like I was sort of in a better place with that thing, it felt like something else would come up. And so that's kind of how it works, is when you start working on stuff, it's like you're peeling a layer and then peeling a layer and peeling a layer. I can remember I got some unsolicited feedback from this person who was a friend of mine but then not didn't become a friend of mine because she decided that I was really detached and that I like wasn't emotionally invested in our friendship. And I started digging into that and realized that I had attachment issues because I had moved 16 times by the time I was 17. And the only people I was close to was my own family system, who was highly dysfunctional. And so, of course, I was detached because I kept losing, like, I couldn't get attached to anybody because we just would move. So I would be someplace for 12 to 18 months and we'd move. And so why would I get close to anybody? I liked people, but I got this unsolicited feedback from this person. And I was like, I don't even know what she's talking about. But, I was like, well, I got to go figure this one out. So I went in and started digging and found out, like, yeah, you have attachment issues.
So I wonder if, and this is just something I'm throwing out there, that generally speaking, we go through life getting on with the stuff that presents itself to us, the day-to-day requirements of our life and work. And whilst they're going reasonably well, we don't question much. Good days, bad days, whatever, we get on with it. And every so often something comes up and we can either choose to pause and listen to it or ignore it and carry on.
Or make it somebody else's problem.
Make it somebody else's problem is one way out of it. And in my experience, what happens is if we blame someone else or we bury it, it's not going to go away. It's going to resurface at some point, potentially in an even more difficult way than it did first time around. So can you share with us when that happens? What's the most helpful thing in your experience?
I think it's tough. So it's first of all to like know how you learn. So for me, I need to understand something, like why is this happening or what is happening or what is this about? So I need to dig in and kind of understand. And then once I understand a little bit about like what's happening, then I'm like, okay, well, what's the path forward to heal it, to grow? And when I say heal, there's like a difference between gaining a skill and healing an old injury, like an emotional injury, because that takes grief work. It's a different kind of work than gaining a skill. So for me, it's like, let me learn a little bit about what's happening or what am I experiencing. And then basically I'm like, how do I fix this? Whatever the fix looks like how do I approach the healing or growing from this?
Okay, so what I'm hearing is you're quite a pragmatic learner, kind of an active learner, so to speak.
I am.
For people who are more theoretical or reflective in their learning styles, what would work better for them?
So it's still the same process. It's an active process. So I run into people all the time who really do think that they can think their way through something. And I love them. I'm like, oh, bless your heart. No, it doesn't work like that. But I will help them understand. And then they may take more time to like think about it and come back and ask some questions. And sometimes they need a process. They need to know like, what's the process? What does this process look like that I'm going to go through? Kind of what can I expect? But the process is still the same. It just might take them longer to get through it.
Yeah, and the thinking part probably needs to come first. Got to make sense of it, and it's like, oh, okay. And then it might be a leap of faith to go into the more experiential aspect. Not quite sure where it's going to lead. Maybe a fear I've sometimes noticed, and again, I can speak to this from my own experience of fear of what they might find. Digging inside oneself, wherever that is, can feel quite scary.
I don't think there's anything as scary, really. There's nothing as scary as deciding that you're going to dig back into something that was painful for you because you don't know what you're going to find. And grief sucks. Like it sucks. It just sucks. I mean, but it's necessary to like grieve a loss, but it still sucks. And there's nothing as scary as being like, I got to go do that again.
I saw something the other day which I thought was rather nice. It was kind of a diagram where grief was represented as a circle in a bottle. And the stages of grief, there were about 6 of them, according to this particular diagram. And the last stage, the circle was the same size, but the bottle was bigger. It was like the grief itself never goes away. What you can do is build around it to be able to function.
I think with some things, grief doesn't completely go away. So like, I think if someone passes away, especially if they pass away in kind of a traumatic way. So my best friend lost one of her twins 20 days after she had her. And I talked to her 2 weeks ago, and it still hurt. Her one daughter turned 21 2 weeks ago, but she still feels the loss of the daughter that didn't make it. And so, does it ever go away? I think in some cases, no. I think in other cases, it can. I do. I just think it can dissipate for those traumatic losses, kind of like Barbara's, but in others, like it can completely resolve.
So, looking at your work, Chris, and where you are now, and given that your counselling psych and all of your therapeutic experience, of your own exploration of your own life and journey, and everything that you bring back into your work with others, how do you see your work going forward from here?
Well, I don't know completely what it'll look like, but I do know one of the things that I've just recently started is a curriculum called Relationship University. And we're teaching our first pilot class. My friend Barbara, that I referred to, Barbara and I are teaching our first pilot class at the end of March to just begin helping people learn what a healthy relationship looks like, both personally, professionally, in a community, what healthy expectations look like, how to make values based decisions, how to question or challenge your own belief system and make sure like you believe the stuff you want to believe, not that you just inherited from your parents or your environment. And so all of the work that I feel like I've done to now, I'm putting into this curriculum.
Is it online or in person or both or what?
It's in person right now because we're just starting the curriculum and we've got to actually test the curriculum. And honestly, relationship stuff it's not great online because you don't get to practice the same way. You don't see people in person. You don't see their reactions. Like the 2-dimensional versus 3-dimensional actually does make a significant difference. You don't feel energy. You're not able to read body language as well. And so it'll probably stay in person is my guess.
So mainly then for people who live where you live in Atlanta, Georgia, for the moment.
Yeah. Or if like an organization would hire us, or if we decide to do it in like different places in the country, which, we might. But, I have a lot of friends in Europe, so who knows?
Yeah, it sounds very exciting. And as you say, it's putting everything that you've learned into this program, into this curriculum. How does that feel?
It feels like it's a good next step with the kind of the culmination of everything I've learned so far. And it also feels like a good next step. I think I've been afraid for a really long time to do something that's more public because it's just hard to get people into public programs. It takes a whole different marketing engine, and corporations have money. And so it's safer like to work in corporations because they have money. So that is there's fear around that. There's fear around, I run into a lot of people who don't actually want to grow. They actually don't. They're okay doing what they're doing. They're okay showing up the way they're showing up. They really are okay. And kind of to your point, if everything's going okay enough, like they're fine with that.
And, why not, frankly? But there are still plenty of people who aren't, and for whom something is coming up that they don't fully understand, perhaps a sort of a niggly feeling inside, or a sense of unease, or lack of fulfillment, or whatever it may be. So would you say that your curriculum that you're building with Barbara, or have built about Pilot, is for people for whom something doesn't feel quite right?
They might come for that reason, or they might come because they know that their work requires them to be very good relationally. So if I'm a leader, if I'm a project manager, if I'm an HR person, if I'm a salesperson, anybody who actually is consistently building, maintaining, and repairing relationships. I mean, really, that's all of us. But if it's a felt need for your job, or if you're like, I'm just curious if maybe I could be better than I am today. I'm just curious, could I be a better parent? Could I be a better partner? Could I be a better friend? All of those things, if you're curious about growth in relationships, I think that would draw people as well.
And Chris, knowing you as I have done now for many years, I can't think of a better person to do that work with. And I wish you every success. It sounds a really valuable thing to be doing. So as we draw this to a close, there's a question I ask everyone on this podcast, and it's this. Looking at where you are now, when you think of the term fearless forward, what does it mean to you?
I think for me, it means I have to keep doing the work that is hard. And there are days I'd rather not do it because it's hard. But in order for me to be as good as I can be, like to help other people grow, I have to keep growing myself. And when you're where I am, what that means is the work actually gets harder and harder and harder because you're going deeper and deeper and deeper. And so it just means like I have to stay the course, partially because I love helping people grow, but also partially because like I think it's the gift that I've been given and therefore I'm responsible.
Chris, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Of all the helpful insights Chris shared with us, perhaps the key takeaway is this. Being a leader, like being a parent, is both a gift and a responsibility. You have the power to help your children and the people you lead, or harm them. To take your role seriously, you must accept that it's your responsibility to be the best you can be for them all. And here are some of her other insights, in no particular order. Your family background and upbringing inevitably affect the way you are and how you behave. If those circumstances were difficult, you may unconsciously be imitating behaviours that caused you harm and imposing unnecessary limitations on yourself. If you recognise this, you can change your behaviours, but past trauma doesn't just resolve itself, and if you ignore it, it will always resurface in some way. To heal it, you need to understand how you learn, and to recognise that working through a past trauma is an active process that involves grief work. It may take a while, because resolving one thing that comes up may uncover another, and another. As Chris put it, there's nothing as scary as digging back into something that was painful for you. Facing ourselves is possibly the most courageous thing we ever do. That's why so many of us look outside ourselves for solutions instead of listening inside ourselves for the answers. If this conversation inspires you to reach out for help, please don't hesitate to get in touch to discuss the help you need. Thank you for listening. Fearless Forward is edited and produced by Mark Steadman. I'll be back with you in 2 weeks for our next conversation about how leaders have faced their fears. To be sure of catching it, go to fearlessforward.org, activate push notifications from your favourite podcast source, or subscribe to my weekly bulletin at skillfulleaders.com.